Hey, SAS listeners, welcome back to Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. Coming to you from the Long Valley Studio in Washington, Utah, I'm your host, Dave Markel, and this is episode 197. Today's guest, Cherry Fargo, knows the tragedy of childhood sexual abuse and the healing journey firsthand. As a child, she endured years of abuse at the hands of her stepfather while carrying responsibilities no child should ever have to bear. Yet through her extraordinary resilience, hard work, supportive relationships, and a deep commitment to healing, she transformed her pain into a mission of helping other survivors reclaim their lives. This is a conversation about trauma, but it's also about grief, faith, identity, and hope. Whether you're a survivor yourself or someone who loves one, I believe that you'll find wisdom, encouragement, and perhaps a reminder that healing isn't about forgetting the past. It's about refusing to let the past define your future. Here's Cherry. Hey, SAS listeners, I am really thrilled to have in the studio with me Cherry Fargo. Cherry, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Cherry, if you don't mind, tell my audience how you found out about sexual assault survivor stories, and then if you would, give a little bit of background about yourself.
Sure. I found out about your show through my good friend Melissa, who's been on one of your previous episodes. We went to church together for quite a while, and we are just dear friends. I love her. She's so supportive. She introduced me to you, and I'm appreciative of that. I met her when I lived in Texas, and before I lived in Texas, I grew up in Northern California. And so now I'm in Oklahoma. So I'm a transplant of a transplant.
Quite the traveling.
Yeah. I moved away after high school and after beauty college, which I never ended up doing anything in beauty college. Met my husband when I moved to Texas. I really thought I was only moving out of California for a year or two. And now so many years later, I'm still not back in California. But met my husband in Texas. He was living there temporarily. He's originally from here in Oklahoma. And we got married and had 4 children and raised them almost all the way through high school while we lived in Texas. My youngest was in between her freshman and sophomore years of high school when we moved to Oklahoma to be closer to my father-in-law, who was a widow and just needed some extra help and extra care. At that time, I'd finished up my college education. I'd gone to the King's University and gotten a degree in Christian ministries and was really excited about pursuing a coaching career and writing my book and doing all of the things that I really felt like the Lord was leading me to do. And within a few months of being in Oklahoma, my father-in-law, unfortunately, got an incurable cancer diagnosis. COVID shut the world down.
Yeah.
And so he passed within a few months. And then later on that same year, in November of 2020, my mother got an infection. She didn't die from COVID, but she died because of COVID. She was in Southern California, and they just weren't equipped for the influx of patients they had and overlooked some things. And so she ended up becoming septic. And so she passed in November of 2020.
Oh, man.
And then I brought at the time, my 90-year-old grandmother out here to Oklahoma. So family would be nearby. Somebody would take care of her. And she's a very important person in my story. And I'll leave it at that for the moment.
Okay.
But she's a very important person in my story. And I spent about the last year up until February living with her. I was her full-time caretaker the entire time she was here in Oklahoma. She was very, very healthy. She had only ever been hospitalized when she'd given birth to her 3 children in 1947, 48, and 49, up until about June of last year. And then she had a TIA, mini stroke, decided that she did not ever want to be hospitalized. And that began a journey of just some home health care, which turned into hospice. And she passed in February. And so I've been kind of walking this really odd journey of grief and excitement, because I am excited about the things that I get to do and setting up my coaching business and being able to help women survivors of childhood abuse. But when I get excited, then I feel a little guilty, because it's like I can only do that because she's no longer here. And so it's just been this really odd journey between grief and joy. And I'm learning a
Mhm.
lot in that,
Yeah,
and I miss her dearly, but I know that sorry, getting
that's
emotional.
okay. No,
I
that's
know that
perfectly understandable.
yeah, I know that she is very proud of the work that I do, and so grateful for her.
Well,
And
I'm
so now
sorry.
I'm just, oh, thank you very much. Now I'm just branching out. I'm spreading my wings late in life.
I'm sorry for your loss of her, but also all of your losses. Those were kind of back to back to back. And
Yeah.
my deepest sympathy and condolences on all of that. That's a lot to go through in a short period of time. So,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
But also, congratulations on your efforts and what you're accomplishing. And it's part of why I wanted you to be on the show with me today is to talk about some of that. And you've got a book. We'll talk about that. And also what you're doing with coaching and how you are helping other women who've been through the horrible experience of childhood sexual assault. And speaking of that, Cherry, let's go into it. What are you able to tell us about your sexual assault experiences as a child?
Sure. So my parents divorced when I was 4, and my mother remarried several years later. And he seemed like a genuinely nice guy, kind of a charismatic, outgoing kind of personality to begin with. And over the years, he got a little more controlling and a little more controlling. And he didn't work. There was a period of time that we got to where he no longer worked, so he just stayed at home. And then when I was about 12, molestation began, and it was a weekly occurrence. My grandmother, I told you she was a very important person in my story. My grandmother, who's my mom's mom, kind of picked up that there must be something going on. And there were a lot of conversations. She'd come to get me and take me to go spend weekends with her. And there were a lot of conversations, and I couldn't ever say anything because I was very, very afraid. There were threats that had been made. It was a secret. You have to keep it a secret. And if you tell our secret, then I will kill you. I mean, there were some very serious threats made. And so I just never could say anything to her about it. And when I was turning 14, and the abuse wasn't just the molestation, it was physical, it was emotional, it was verbal. I was told very often that I was stupid and that I would never amount to anything. He didn't work. My mom worked all the time to just make ends meet because here she is trying to raise 4 children. Well, three. My brother came along after my 14th birthday. We were 3 children and run a household. And so my mom was just very, very overwhelmed. When my sister was born, I became her primary caretaker, really. I mean, he wasn't working, but he didn't do anything. I did the dishes and I swept the floors and I gave my sister her baths and I fed her and changed her and really had that caretaker mother role of her in that time. And so my grandmother saw all of this as well, which is why she would come and get me to go hang out with her on weekends when she was available. So for my 14th birthday, she decided she was going to throw a birthday party for me and invite a couple of very close family friends. I always called them cousins. And one of them was a year older than me, and the other was 2 years. And we were going to have a slumber party. So we all went to pizza and went back to her house. They decided they were going to go for a walk, and I had a bruise on my cheek because he had gotten angry at me for some reason and picked up a glass bottle of gun oil and had thrown it across the room at me. And it
Wow.
caught me in the cheek and it left a bruise. So my grandmother asked me about that, what had happened, and I explained it to her. And then she very pointedly asked me a question that I couldn't answer, but in my response, it answered it for her because I just fell apart sobbing. I could not say what he had done, but she knew by my response that he was doing things that were inappropriate. At which time she decided that I was not going to go home to live in that environment anymore. And she called my mother, who was 8 months pregnant with my youngest brother.
Mm.
Her father had just passed away. She was very stressed out, very emotional. And she asked my grandmother, and I can't even imagine how hard it is for a mom to call her daughter and tell her somebody's doing something to her daughter,
Yeah.
and to be that bold and to be that just adamant that she was going to step in and she wasn't going to allow it to happen anymore. So my mom had asked her that if she just came and picked me up, what would my grandmother do if my mom just said, no, I'm going to come get her? And my grandmother said, well, I would call the police and they would be at your house because she's not coming home. You need to bring me her stuff. And so my mom did, and she brought the stuff and she asked me, and again, I couldn't say the words. I couldn't verbally express what had been going on. I
Right.
couldn't say it. And so she believed that I was no longer safe in the home because of the accusations, but she didn't necessarily believe that the accusations were accurate, which was horribly, horribly upsetting and horribly hurtful. And for a long time, I carried that wound for a very, very long time. Then, when I went to go share about some of my experiences, my testimony with a group of church women, my sister decided she was going to go with me. And I was like, "Ooh, I need to tell you what I'm talking about," because I'm talking about our experiences growing up. And my mom had carried so much guilt for not believing me and just so much shame herself that she hadn't believed me at the time. And then she shared a story with me. And so this was in 2017. It was the first time that I'd heard the story. And it'd been years and years and years, right? Since the abuse was over and I'm grown, I've got children. But she shared this story that when she got home that night, my stepdad was sitting on the couch and he had my brother on one side of him and my sister sitting on the other side of him, and he had a loaded gun in his lap. And he had every intention of killing himself and everybody else if the police had shown up.
Hmm.
And I'm not sure what you believe about God, Dave, but I absolutely believe that my mom not believing me when I was 14 was God's protection, because how much more traumatic would my life have felt had I lost my whole family because of it?
Man.
I actually tread lightly on the subject of faith just from my own experience. I know because when I found out that the abuse didn't only happen to me, but it happened to my younger sister starting at the age of 1, I was very, very angry with God. Very, very angry with God. And I spent
Mm-hmm.
about a decade telling people that I did not believe in God because I certainly wasn't going to acknowledge a God that would allow that to happen. And
Yeah.
so there's been a lot of wrestling in my journey, discovering the truth in that and weighing that out. But it's easy for women who have any kind of sexual abuse or assault in their background, especially childhood abuse, to become very, very angry with God. And so that's just a journey that each woman has to take for herself. So that was the first time that I had heard that story. And I just sat on it for a while. And it wasn't until I was sharing it with somebody else that it really, really hit me how differently things could have been. Like they were bad, but how much worse they could have been if she had been able to believe me in that moment. So that night, there was a lot of healing between me and my mom. There was a lot of healing for my mom, I believe. And when I wrote my book in 2020, well, I started my book in 2020. When my mother passed, I set it aside and I had a really, really hard time coming back to it because she was never going to be able to read it.
Mm.
And it was for her as much as it was for anybody else. And so it took me a while to pick it back up. The next day, my sister and I went and I shared our story with a group of women. And when we were done, my sister just said, "Oh my gosh, I love the way you tell our story, and I want to be able to do that as well." Now, mind you, my sisters and my journeys were very different because I had a biological father who was very, very, he was loving and he was kind. I had more of a safe space than she had at times. And so in her life, she struggled with multiple personality disorder, which I think they call it something different now, DID. She struggled with bipolar depression, drug addiction, a lot of just really awful kinds of relationships with men who took advantage of her. And about a year before this night that I had gone down, she had gone through a retreat, and her life was just totally changed. So much so that her alternate personality never manifested again. She didn't struggle with the depression any longer, the
Wow.
bipolar.
Wow.
She was almost completely healed of that. The drug addiction, she was delivered from that. And she really felt like she knew who she was. She felt like she had value. She knew that there was good things in life, and she was happy and she was content. And so this day when we go and share her story afterwards, and she's saying, "Oh, I just love the way you tell our story, and I want to be able to do the same thing. I want to be able to encourage other women who have been through difficult things." And so again, I took care of her. When she was born, I was 11. I took care of her. I mothered her. And so we had a different than a mother. So with my sister, I had a different than a typical sibling relationship, and then even with my grandmother, I had a different than a typical granddaughter grandmother relationship. All of these relationships were much closer because of what we went through.
Sure.
But so I was so excited. I just was thinking about the possibilities and how cool would it be for the two of us to be able to stand together and share our stories and make a difference in the lives of other women and let them know that there's hope and there's healing. But unfortunately, she passed away very suddenly and unexpectedly about 9 days later. And so I was crushed by that as well. And so I carry both of our stories, and I share them in a hopes that other women will find what they need to move past the trauma that just lingers and keeps us from everything that we're capable of doing and everything we're capable of being.
This is such a powerful story, Cherry, that just in this short period of time that we've been talking with each other, I am so thrilled that you are where you are in your healing journey to be able to sit here and talk to me this way. And I can tell, obviously, it's emotional. And what you're talking about is critical for my audience to hear. I am just so thrilled that you're here, and I can't thank you enough for doing this.
Again, thank you for having me and allowing me to share. I'm so passionate about it. It took
Yeah.
me a really long time to find my healing. I'm more stubborn than most and more tenacious than most people I know. And there were times I felt like I was banging my head against a brick wall and not experiencing the peace, the joy, the hope that I know was available to me. And so I just don't want other women to spend that long trying to find their healing, but I also don't want women to give up. I don't want women to become discouraged because they've been looking for it for so long and they can't find it. And it takes community, and I think you've talked about that before, how important that is. And we absolutely heal within community and within situations and circles where other people know what we've been through and they can relate and they can see us and they can encourage us.
What's important about that is that now you are part of this Sexual Assault Survivor Stories family, the SAS guest family. You're most probably going to hear either directly or through me of people who want to reach out to you and make that connection because of that community. People are going to relate to what you're talking about because of your story. Obviously, other victims, survivors have been through or are going through something very similar to what you've been through. And there's connections that are made. In that light, Cherry, can we go back to your childhood? You said this started when you were 12.
Yes.
Are you able to tell us more about how the abuse started? You had been involved with this man's life from the time your mom remarried and he came into your life. Help me understand the timeline. How much time elapsed between the time your mom married him and the time the abuse started?
That's a good question, and it's a one that I have a hard time with. There are a lot of ways that my memory is not great, and I
Mm,
know that that's a trauma response.
that's correct. Yeah.
I believe that they got married when I was about 7 or 8 years old. And so then the abuse began when I was about 12. So they'd been married for probably 4 years,
Hmm.
a good 4 years when the abuse began. He was a very manipulative kind of person. And so it began under the guise of him being a cared and concerning father figure and needing to check on my development and how I was growing and those kinds of things. So that's
Yeah.
kind of
That's exactly where I was wanting to go. What the grooming techniques were that he used that maybe you remember, maybe you don't, because you're right. There's a trauma issue there where the brain sometimes doesn't record well the trauma experiences. So, yeah, I can definitely understand how manipulative that must have felt. What was the impact in your daily life when this started? You'd go to school, you'd try and have relationships with the people you'd had relationships with. And obviously, he put you in a state of fear of death and more trauma, but injury at least, but possibly being killed by him. How did that impact your daily life?
right. So, like I said, he was very manipulative and the grooming was very subtle. And so, like I said, it started with that guise of, oh, I need to check on your development. I need to see how you're growing. And then it was very, very gradual for me. Like I said, my sister's experience was different, and the things
Yeah.
that he did to her were much worse because she didn't have a voice. She's an
She was
infant.
one.
She doesn't know.
Yeah.
She doesn't have a voice. But me being very strong willed, again, I had a voice. And so there were a certain amount of things I was willing to push back on. However, that came at a cost. And so if I said no or refused to cooperate, then he became very angry and I had to do more chores. And then when my brother got home from school, he took it out on him. He yell, scream, make him do more chores. My mom would get home, he'd be hateful and ugly with her and holler, scream at her. So he would just make everybody miserable. So he was not only manipulative, but he was very controlling with his manipulation. And I think probably by the time I was in, um, well, probably by the time we were about 6 months into what was going on, I was no longer really allowed to go anywhere. I didn't have any friends. I was only allowed to bathe once a week. So my hair was always very oily and greasy. So I got labeled the school scum, which was not fun. I have one good friend. I'm very grateful for her because she was very kind to me even when other people weren't. I remember, I think probably eighth grade, an instance where I had gotten invited to a slumber party and I was so excited. And of course, I wasn't allowed to go. And so I was crushed until I got to school on Monday. And the girls talked about how it was a good thing I didn't come because I was going to be the brunt of all the pranks and all the jokes. So you asked how it affected my social life. I didn't even really have one. And I remember struggling with a math class one time and I was going to stay after for tutoring. My stepdad was, well, you've got to bring home a note. And when I asked the teacher, and look, I have to have a note saying that I'm staying for tutoring, the teacher just wasn't even cooperative. He was like, no, why would I do that? I don't have to do that. And so I didn't actually get the tutoring that I needed in my math class. So it affected a lot of things. I mean, it made life really difficult and really, really challenging.
I think that's important to note uh, as part of your lived experience. And it definitely, of course, made you who you are today. That parentification aspect of it, taking care of your sister at such a young age and being responsible for her, help us understand as an audience listening to this horrific story how that part of it impacted you, not only then, but maybe even now. How did that impact you as you grew up and your sister got older and you were developing a relationship with her? Can you describe what it felt like to have been her parent, basically, and still be her friend?
I'm not really sure if there are words for it. I felt responsible for her. So like I said, when I my grandmother removed me from the home and my mom didn't believe me, none of us could fathom what even thought. Like it didn't cross our minds, anybody's mind, that maybe he was doing this to my sister. And so several years later, when we discovered this, I felt very, very guilty because I thought, well, if I hadn't have left, right? Like I took on this illegitimate shame that didn't belong to me because
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't my responsibility, but I carried it. If I hadn't have left, maybe it wouldn't have happened to her. And of course, that was before we even realized how soon it had begun happening with her. So I felt a lot of responsibility for her, and then always just a lot of care and compassion and concern for her. There was one time my husband and my mom went and picked her up out of a flop house, a drug house in Dallas, Texas, because that was just the lifestyle that she had fallen into. And that always broke my heart, but I didn't know what to do for her or how to really fix her, right? Like we all have to get to that point where we're ready to embrace the hard work. Staying stuck and letting our trauma have that kind of power over us, that's hard.
Yeah.
But stepping out and fighting for something different is hard too. And so we have
Right.
to pick our hard. And one of them's going to keep us trapped and one of them's going to set us free. They're both difficult. So I'm just very grateful that I had taken her to that retreat. It was funny because I'd asked her, I'd already been to the retreat, and it's one of those retreats you go through it and then you don't get to come back and go through it again. You can come back and you can serve and you can be a part of the leadership team, but you don't go through the retreat again. And so I'd asked her, and I didn't realize she wasn't picking up what I was saying, but I'd asked her, I'm like, hey, do you want to go to this retreat? Because it made a profound difference for me as well. And so I said, do you want to go to this retreat? And she's like, sure. And I'm like, okay, I'll take you, meaning that I would take her take her where the retreat was and drop her off. And it wasn't until the day of the retreat that she realized that I was not going with her. And she was a little bit overwhelmed and a little bit afraid. But because I had just been not too long before her, I was able to introduce her to a lot of the same ladies that were there when I was there. And I'm like, please take good care of her, you know? And they did. And so, in those ways, again, just feeling kind of responsible for her and trying to find the ways to best help her. And then just being so, so proud of her when she finally was able to break those things that kept her trapped, break the addictions and overcome the mental illness, and just amazing things happened in her life. And again, I fully believe that it's the hand of God that did those things for her. I know different people are going to have different reactions to that, but it's an important piece of my walk and my journey. I think that a foundation of faith can be very, very helpful to a lot of people when they're walking through this kind of journey.
I agree with you. I've talked about this before on this show that I too have a spiritual foundation that I rely upon. But I'm going to agree with you. What I think your sister went through is nothing short of miraculous. And I think it's awesome that you recognize it and that you speak about it because it's an important part of this story. So thank you for sharing that. And let me just say this too, while we're talking about this, how terribly sorry I am for everything that you've been through. I mentioned my sorrow about the people in your life that have passed, but also I want you to know how sorry I am for the experience you had of all the inappropriate things that went on and the physical abuse and the emotional and mental turmoil that you've been through. To get past that says a lot about who you are. And I think the fact that you are as zealous as you are, as you mentioned, and as strong-willed to make sure that others hear this story and benefit from it is impactful and important and impressive and commendable. So it's an aspect of this show that I think we need to recognize right here in your own telling of your story. And if you could, Cherry, could you help us understand the healing process that you went through that led you to get to the point where you did decide to write a book and pick it up again after your mom died, and how that came about and what that was like to finish that book?
Yeah, absolutely. First, I do want to just say that fortunately, I was never raped. There was grooming that was happening to try to lead to that kind of a thing. Again, my strong willed nature and my just flat out refusal to cooperate at times, I think it helped prevent that. But it was going that direction. And I think that had my grandmother not rescued me out of that situation, it would have become that. So my healing journey again took me a long time and it was a lot of trial and error. I did do some counseling here and there. I did do some classes. I was in the church and I was leading the Bible studies and I was going every Sunday and I was volunteering and I was doing all the things, like I said, and still didn't feel like I was experiencing what I heard preached from the pulpit on Sunday mornings. And I wanted that. And I found that many, many people within the church didn't know what to do with my trauma. They just did not know what to do with it or how to deal with it or how to handle it. And finally ended up in a place where there was a freedom ministry. And so I spent about a year and a half, and I'd done some of the work up till that point, but then spent about a year and a half with these two very precious women, just digging into all of the things that trauma kind of brings with it, which are like unforgiveness and judgment, bitter root expectations, those things that we just think, well, it's always been this way, so it's always going to be that way. I think I said unforgiveness already. But one of the things that I discovered during that time, too, that I really had to deal with that I hadn't expected was my own reactions that were not helpful, the ways that I dealt with it. We all have like a default method of dealing with our trauma and our stress, and usually they're not productive. And so there was a lot of that I had to work through and go, man, that was my fault, right? Like there's a lot of it that wasn't my fault, but that was my fault. And some of it was just because I didn't know, but I was very promiscuous and just very casual in my relationships for several years. And just things that I allowed myself to fall into because I didn't take the time. I didn't feel worthy. I think worth is one of those things that gets stripped away from you.
Right, right.
Um, it doesn't get stripped away from you. Your sense of worth
Sense of worth, correct.
gets stripped away from you when you go through any kind of sexual abuse or assault. And so you just kind of sometimes go along and just like whatever, and don't live life intentionally. And so learning how to live life intentionally and learning how to be aware of what was causing my reactions, learning how to respond rather than react. When we react, it's just kind of like this blah,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't have any control. We're not exercising any control over our emotions or our thoughts or our words or our actions. And learning how to turn that into, okay, this has happened, but I have a choice about what I'm going to do about it and how I'm going to handle it. And so that is responding rather than reacting. And so that's been a big, big, big key and factor in my healing. And that takes the willingness to be self aware and a willingness to dig in to our own emotions and our own thoughts because we can't control anything that anybody else thinks or does. We can't control anything that was done to us. All we can now control is how we're going to live life and walk through this life in the aftermath of that. And again, it's hard work, but it's worth it. It's absolutely worth it.
Yeah.
And so after that time that I spent with those ladies going through all of those things and digging into them and learning better who I was and who I was meant to be, I finally got around to writing the book. It's strange because I've known my whole life that I was supposed to write a book, but I didn't know what it was going to be. I mean, I knew what I wanted it to be about, but I just didn't have it all. And it wasn't until I really got some healing underneath me that it was like, oh, okay, here it is. And so the book is, it's a journey dealing with that shame, that illegitimate shame that we carry, and learning how to let go of that, recognizing how shame and fear affect our life and how there's a legitimate use of shame and fear. A legitimate shame is, oh, I missed the mark and I need to do better. It calls us higher. But there's that illegitimate shame that, oh, I'm a horrible person. I don't have any value. I'm no good. I'm too stupid. That's like an illegitimate shame that's placed on us because of the actions of somebody else.
Right.
And so we've got to recognize that, because that's one of the biggest stumbling blocks to us finding our healing, is not feeling like we're worthy enough of it, or letting fear drive our emotions and our thoughts. So getting beyond those. And so I dive in, and I've got a framework within the book to help. And so we give it recognition. That's one of the biggest problems we have, is we try to sweep everything underneath the rug. Well, you do that for so long, you've got a pile that you're going to trip over. So we've got to give it recognition. These things happened. They're horrible. They're awful. Nobody should have to go through this, but they did. They happened. And this is how I feel about it because they happened. And I can't change it. I can't change what happened. It's done. So all I can do now is choose how I'm going to move forward. So we've got to give it recognition. And then once we kind of give things recognition, we can start to retrain the way we think about things. And that's just that difference between reacting and responding, like I talked about. How do we turn this around? Thought trail is going this direction. I know that's not healthy. How do I retrain my brain? How do I turn that around? How do I acknowledge the truth and move forward in a different direction? And then once we've got those two things done, we can then begin to release. Okay, I'm just going to release all of this. I can't do anything about it. So I'm just going to release it all. And for me, it's releasing it back to the Lord, going, okay, I'm going to put this back in your hands, and I'm going to trust you with it. And that, again, took me a long time to get to that place where I felt like I could do that. But for me, that's what it is. It's just releasing it, letting go of it, because we can't do anything about it anyways. And then refocusing is the fourth one. And that's where we're just going to stop looking at the past, and we're going to refocus and set our sights on the future. We can't change what's behind us, but we don't have to let it keep us trapped either. So we're going to refocus on the future, and we're going to move forward. A lot of this is very, very practical. It's setting goals and taking stock of your emotions and finding help, finding people who can encourage you and hold you accountable along the way, finding communities that are supportive and reliable. And I talk a lot about what is a safe person, what is a safe group. And then when we go through that framework, then we begin to talk about our identity, because again, that's one of those things that's kind of stripped away from us, especially if your abuse has been prolonged. That's exactly what your abusers are doing, is they're trying to strip your identity away so that you are compliant, or so that you don't feel like you can do things on your own. They want you to feel helpless. But that's not our identity. It doesn't have to be our identity. So we talk about what our identity really is and should be. And once we talk about that, then we talk about, okay, now we know who we are. Now we have a purpose in this life. Every single one of us has a purpose. There's something that we're meant to do. And so now that we have released the past, we've got some good tools to deal with it when we're triggered. We know who we are. Now we can dive in and we can start looking at, what can we do? What is our purpose? Where can we make a difference in this world and make a positive impact? Take this broken mess of junk that we were dealt and turn it into something that makes a positive impact on the world around us.
Yeah. those steps, they're difficult. And you mentioned earlier that it takes a lot of work to get through those steps. But I also think as I was listening to the different steps, there are points in each one of those steps that you get to as you're accomplishing those tasks, those errands that you need to do yourself to get on to the next point, that at some point it starts becoming easier in the sense that you can see some fruition of success and feel some of the release that comes along with each one of those steps. And I know in my own experience of going through similar steps of those that those are inspiring and keep you moving forward as you continue the work. If you're willing to do the work, there are some very motivational aspects to each one of those steps.
Yes. And I tell the ladies that I work with all the time too, one of the things we've got to work on is managing our expectations because we somehow think that we're going to do these four things and we're going to be done and it's over and we're great and we're good. But healing isn't linear. And a lot of times we'll come back around and we'll think that we've just gone around a mountain and we're back in exactly where we started. But it's not really like that at all. It's more like a circular staircase. You come back around and you're having to deal with this issue again, but you're dealing with it from an elevated position. You have a
Right.
better perspective.
Right.
You've gained a level of healing. You maybe haven't gained all of your healing in that area. You might go back around that spiral staircase a few more times, but every time you do, you're coming around to a different perspective and a
Yeah.
different level of healing. And so I just encourage people not to get discouraged if you feel like you're right back where you started. That's an illusion. And let's really take stock of that and let's really look at it because I bet your mindsets have changed somewhat. You can recognize some things that are different than the first time that you were in that exact spot. So I just like to encourage women. It's not a linear process. You'll go back through these. You'll get through them and you might go back and you might get through the third step and go back to the first step and that's okay. I mean, that's absolutely okay.
Yeah, you're right. And to hear the encouraging words that you've talked about in explaining how those steps do lead to some accomplishment and motivation is inspiring in and of itself. I want to change course a little bit, not a lot, in the sense that I'd like to have you personalize for us how it is that when those tough times come around again for you in your personal experience of going through what you've been through, what are some of the things that you could share with the audience about in terms of how you respond? What do you do to take care of yourself?
I'm a doer. I'm a type A personality, and that is not always good because I have this tendency to overfill my schedule. And the time this past year that I spent caring for my grandmother helped quite a bit, learning to be really content within the boundary lines that have been drawn for me instead of kind of fighting against them or being frustrated because I can't do ABCD and I want to do ABCD. There are seasons for everything. And so learning to be content in the season that I'm in has been a challenge for me, but it's also been a comfort for me. It's just learning to let go of things that aren't meant for right now. And that doesn't mean they're not meant forever, they're just not meant for right now. And so I was in that season for about a year. And then I have a daily routine in the mornings, and I get up and I spend some time reading and I spend some time journaling. And that is a big self care piece for me. I just really need that time. I really, really need that time of prayer and reflection. So that's a very key piece for me. I love to craft. I'm in my studio right now. And so crafting, being creative, doing something creative, if I just get really, really overwhelmed, just taking some time and setting it aside and doing something creative is helpful for me. And I talk about that in the book too. Like you said, coping mechanisms. We all have to have a coping mechanism. So, what is it that we enjoy doing that is also practical, or what can we pair that with? So, if you love listening to music. Can you throw your headphones on while you go for a walk, which is also a good coping mechanism,
Yeah.
and listen to your music while you're walking? So partnering something that you don't necessarily like with something that you enjoy doing as a coping mechanism when both things are beneficial is good. And so sometimes I challenge myself to do that because we grow when we're outside our comfort zones. So if we only ever do what we've always done, there's not a lot of personal growth happening. And so we grow outside our comfort zone. So I try to challenge myself to do some things sometimes that are a little bit outside my comfort zone and partner it with something that I do enjoy doing to make it a little easier. And then really loving on other people and being involved. And I've had some help, especially this past year while my grandmother was sick, but 4 different classes that walked through my book of groups of ladies, and just seeing their growth and seeing them connect with one another and pour into one another and encourage one another. Like that's another level of healing for me. It's just amazing to watch when you see everything that you've been through and you've laid it all out and you've got a framework for it, and then you begin to share it with other people, and then you get to see them grow and change. Oh my gosh, that just warms my heart so much. And it's amazing. It's an amazing thing to see. That's one of the things that really helps me too. But I do have to leave margin in my schedule, and I'm learning how to do that, to have some times that are unplanned and leave room for some things that are spontaneous and not always be in control of everything. I'm still a work in progress.
Aren't we all? Cherry, this has been an amazing experience for me, and I know it's going to be for my audience too. I am so thankful for the time you've spent with us. I have to tell you, I think there's so much more that we could talk about. We could go on for hours in not only telling more about your story, because I know it's layered also, but the experience that you've had in helping others. And I wonder if you'd be willing to come back in the future sometime and talk some more about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Well, Cherry, thank you again for being here and for expressing your story and some insights for us that we can take away and learn from. It's been amazing.
Yeah, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share. And I hope that I've encouraged somebody who hears this is encouraged. If any of your listeners need to reach out, I know that you'll give them the links, but I'm happy to help in any way that I can, anytime that I can.
Thank you for doing that. And thank you for all your work. Don't stop doing what you're doing. You're helping save lives. So keep it up.
Thank you so much.
Okay. We'll talk again soon. That does it for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. As I wrap up my conversation with Cherry, I want to thank her for joining me and for her courage in sharing such a deeply personal part of her life. One of the things that stood out to me most during our conversation was Cherry's reminder that healing isn't a straight line. There are setbacks and seasons when old wounds seem to resurface, but that doesn't mean that you've failed or gone backwards. Sometimes it simply means you've returned to those wounds with greater strength, greater wisdom, and a healthier perspective than you had before. I also appreciated her emphasis on community. Trauma often convinces survivors to isolate themselves, but healing so often begins when someone finally feels seen, believed, and understood. None of us were meant to carry life's heaviest burdens alone. If Cherry's story resonated with you, I encourage you to learn more about her work, connect with the resources she offers, and remember that asking for help is never a sign of weakness. It's often the first courageous step towards freedom. Please let others know about this podcast and this episode, and please do what you can to help bring justice to victims and survivors of rape and sexual assault. A good place to start is to start by believing, by taking people seriously, by being willing to have honest conversations about the realities of sexual violence. The more we normalize these conversations, the more we make an impact on eliminating rape culture in our society. Because whether you realize it or not, we all know someone whose life has been impacted by rape or sexual assault. We'll see you next week.